Okay, welcome to our final Temple Emanuel session this morning with, hold on, I have to change the way my screen appears, so I'm sorry about that. Gotta give me, okay, here we go. Welcome to our fourth and final session. And with today, I feel like we've been building to this point. So today, your own Rabbi Wes Gardenswartz is going to be in conversation with our president, Danielle Hartman of the Shalom Hartman Institute, and they will be discussing our children, grandchildren, and Israel. How can we make it better? So that's why I feel like as if each of the sessions in some ways informed this one. We are grateful. We continue to be grateful to Temple Emanuel for being a presenting sponsor for our week of learning and for our incredible partnership with Rabbi Wes and with Amy Klein, our intrepid board member. And a heads up that I know that you, like me, probably always look forward to her newsletter, but especially this week where it will be, I imagine, a distillation of the week that was, and also a heads up about the programming that's coming up the next couple of weeks. So keep an eye out for it midday tomorrow. And thank you to all. As I've said, it's really been a pleasure and a joy to learn with you and to sort of get familiar with your faces. And I look forward to being able to meet you in person. And again, to thank my colleague Ariel for doing all the stuff that keeps us online. And as always, if you have any questions with tech, please text him. And you know, as you all know, the Shalom Hartman Institute is a pluralistic think tank in North American Israel, really, that serves the Jewish people. And if you are looking for more information, in addition to what you're going to see on Amy's newsletter, do not hesitate to look at our website for information on For Heaven's Sake and Identity Crisis, our two podcasts, and our sources, our new journal. I think that, as you know, a recording will be available. And that's about it for today. So I'm going to turn it over to Rabbi Gardenswartz, who will keep us going. And again, thank you.
Jenny, thank you so much. And Jenny and Ariel, thank you for anchoring us every morning. And Danielle, we just cannot thank you. I cannot thank you enough. Temple Emanuel cannot thank you enough. The people on the screen cannot thank you and your colleagues at the Shalom Hartman Institute enough for everything you do and are for us. So Danielle, I want to talk to you this morning about something that is very emotional, very personal, very painful, very raw, very confounding, very confusing. And it is the widespread disconnection of our children and grandchildren from Israel. And I thought the format would be about 50 minutes of dialogue that you and I will have, and we'll try to save 10 minutes at the end for people to send Jenny their questions on the chat. I want to start. So we have one issue, and it's deep and important. It's our children and grandchildren on Israel. And I just want to start with a story. It's a pre-pandemic story, but it's true, and it's true today. My beloved Shira and I were having a Saturday night with 5 couples, just a social evening. With 5 sets of good friends, all from the shul. And we were talking about our children and Israel. And we asked, and all 6 couples around the table, both partners of all 6 couples, are deeply committed in their own way. We don't all agree on Israel, of course. Who agrees on Israel? We're all deeply committed. And so we asked the question, how many of you have children who are as committed to Israel in their own way as you are, who just feel Israel, who love Israel, who struggle with Israel? Not one person raised their hand. By the way, Shira and I could not raise our hands. And then we asked, how many of you have children who are indifferent to Israel? Lots of hands went up. How many of you have children who are hostile to Israel? Lots of hands went up. So hostility to Israel is there. Indifference to Israel is there, but not a deep and abiding love of Israel in their own way and in their own generation, like us. And that is despite the fact, just to add to the conundrum, these are all kids who got the primo treatment of North America on Israel. Most of them went to the day schools of Greater Boston. They went to Schechter or JCDS or Rashi. They went to Israel in the 8th grade or the 7th grade or the 9th grade, or they went on the community program. Most of them went to Israel on passport. A lot of them have kids who went on Birthright Israel, right? Right? And a lot of the parents are AIPAC supporters, right? All this energy, all this money, and not one hand goes up for the love. And most hands go up for hostility or indifference. So that's our big question. And I want to, the poet William Blake said that you can see the entire universe through a grain of sand. And the grain of sand with which I would like to see the universe of our problem is the Rabbinical student letter. So that's what I wanted to do, a deep dive on that. So let me just begin by inviting your general thoughts and comments before we get to the Rabbinical letter. Where does this disconnection happen? What's the origins of it? And at a broad level, how should we be thinking about it and ameliorating it?
First, Wes, I should have said this before you asked the question. How nice it is to be with you. As always.
Ditto.
And you're putting us, you're setting the table. What is probably one of the greatest challenges of the American Jewish community. But could we also put on the table that this is also one of the greatest failures of the American Jewish community? Because maybe, this is what I want, this is what I'm trying to figure out, and I don't know. I'm not blaming people. It's not about blame. But if this is the results that we are getting, is it not just possible, but in all probability probable, that our core education on Israel is flawed? See, there's two possibilities. And one is that our kids are flawed. And I believe that the vast majority of Israel education wants to function under that premise. The kids are flawed. Millennialism is a disease. And the goal is, how do we deflaw our children? And I can't tell you how many educational initiatives are built on that fundamental perspective. And when you start from that perspective, don't be surprised at the results that you're seeing. Now, is it time for us to maybe ask, is there something missing in what we're doing and the way we're talking about Israel? Now, it could be that there are certain things that are out of our control. That's fair enough. Not everything can we control. If Israel and Trump are associated with each other, and if Trump is the embodiment of evil from which we as Jews have to redeem ourselves, it's going to have an effect on their relationship to Israel. It's just, there's nothing you can do. It's out of your heads. And if I don't want to have something to do with Trump, I don't have anything to do with those who are associated with Trump. That we can't, there's factors we can't control. But, and your very, very painful opening, maybe it's time for, that's what I want to talk about together as I was thinking about it. And I've been spending a lot of time, I don't know, I'm trying to push our own thinking about this as well. I think there's something fundamentally wrong, and I'll just give it a headline for a second. I think liberal Judaism is spoken about very openly and clearly. What does liberal Judaism mean? What do we want? What does a liberal Jew mean? and we talk about human empowerment and rights and your challenge to have Judaism speak to you. We speak about Judaism having to integrate modernity, and that modernity is a source of authority, and that Judaism is an evolving religion which requires of us to engage tradition with modernity, and the primacy of the ethical, there's so many features, and the Torah of liberal Judaism, we talk about it all the time. I believe that the American Jewish community, by and large, has for too long now, and by that I mean a decade, which is is the last, and maybe even more, maybe even never, has worked to articulate a liberal Zionism that could live within their liberal Judaism.
So if I hear what you're saying, Daniel, one move is to defraud those millennial children who have the skin disease of millennialism, but that's likely not the right diagnosis, and it's not going to get us anywhere. The other move is a truly Jewish move, is a cheshbon hanefesh, is a spiritual self-inventory. How could we do things better? How could we educate better? And what I hear the energy of this second point being to open up a moral conversation with our children where we hear their moral concerns.
No.
And or their moral questions.
Much more. It's not a moral conversation where we hear their moral questions. That's too late. It's where the official Jewish community, instead of a discourse of Zionism being about declarations of loyalty, that at its core, a discourse about Zionism is about the values that we want to see in Israel. And it's not how do we answer their moral questions. If you and your relationship with Israel is not engulfed with moral aspirations and questions and struggles, your kids are going to assume that they have no part in a Zionist conversation. Okay. It comes way, way deeper than that. What is it that we want to do? Who is it that we want to be?
And so, Danielle, so you can help me because, we'll get to the rabbinical student letter in a minute. And, I've thought long and hard about my own reaction. I just hated that letter. I hated the students that I don't even know who signed that letter. I said we'd blackball them from Temple Emanuel. And I've thought a lot about my response to that. And I want to come back to that. I have a lot to learn from you and from others. So we'll come back to that. But let me just tell you, and I just love you and your Torah, but there's one, and I've heard everything you've said this week. I want to come back to our moral concerns, not just their moral concerns, but I want to double click on one point that you made. Here's where I'm stuck. Here's where I'm caught. This is up until this week. This is what I've always said. I've always said, what's the issue with our moral concerns? What's the possible moral critique of Israel? We really want peace, and we tried. And then I go through that whole litany that you kind of went through and belittled. We tried in 47, and then there were the 3 no's, and then we tried at Oslo, and then there was bus number 18, and then we tried with Barak, and then there was the suicide bombers, and then we got out of Gaza, and then there were 4 wars, okay? And you recite that history it kind of in a dismissive way as if, yeah. But I actually, here's where I'm stuck and here's where I'm caught. Israel really has tried repeatedly to take genuine risks for peace. That was all real. Barak really was the prime minister of Israel. He really did offer sovereignty of East Jerusalem, and we really did get homicide bombers. That's real. Sharon got elected on no disengagement, got elected and disengaged, and we got 4 wars. That's real. So can you say more about what to do with this? So I say, therefore, Israel's tried for peace, and we've always gotten violence in response. Where do you go from there? How do we change the energy around that? But I need you to hear me, because in your litany, it felt dismissive, so can you go there?
Yeah. We haven't done anything in over 10 years, Wes. In over 10 years, we're still talking about Ehud Barak and Sharon. That was 13 years ago. Tell me one thing that we did for the Palestinians in the last 13.
Pause. Let me refresh. I'm going to give you not 13 years ago, I'm going to give you last month. The New York Times ran a podcast on Hamas in May of 2021. So we're talking May of 2021, not 13 years ago. And all of the Hamas leaders said, we continue to be sworn to Israel's destruction. Free Palestine means no Jews in Israel, from the river to the sea, free of Israel. And we have all the time in the world. And if we can't do it, our children will do it. And if our children can't do it, our grandchildren will do it. If our grandchildren can't do it, our great-grandchildren will do it. No Israel, never. No peace, never. And they're the leadership of Hamas. So what is Israel supposed to do with that? That's May of 2021.
Great. Now you're asking just two questions. And could you do me a favor? Keep on stopping me the way you just did. Because I'll just ramble on. Stop me because I really want to talk with you.
I'm doing my best.
And constantly stop me. Just like that. Two things. The first pertains to what we could have done. And the second pertains to what we did and shouldn't have done. The fact that Hamas doesn't want peace doesn't mean that we should build more settlements to make a two-state solution impossible at any time in the future. And I can give you a whole litany similar. The fact that Hamas doesn't want peace, and the Palestinian Authority, and maybe even the Palestinian people, a majority of them don't want peace. It doesn't mean that theft of land, power abuses of soldiers, clear discriminatory practices on an ongoing basis in Judea and Samaria should be sanctioned, approved, and overlooked. So you see, I'm not discounting the litany, the list. I actually agree with the list. I think the list is absolutely correct. I just think it's irrelevant. Because that's not the issue at hand right now. The issue at hand is not if the Palestinians are doing everything that they need to do to bring about a two-state solution. The question is, are there ongoing moral abuses in the occupation which Israel has to give an accounting for and which are not connected to security? The question is whether Israel is creating a permanent reality which will make, or which has possibly already made, a two-state solution impossible. The problem is that we are quoting facts that have nothing to do with the question that people are asking. People are asking, what the bleep are you doing in Sheikh Jarrah? People are asking, why don't you have a serious protocol in place to think about how you deal with Ramadan and the 5 million Muslims over whose Ramadan you control, instead of waking up in the morning and saying, oops, they're throwing Molotov cocktails from Al-Aqsa. What's your Ramadan protocol? And don't tell me you don't have one, because why aren't you thinking about it? Because what you are doing is you are showing that all you are concerned with is how do you curtail the ability of Palestinians to harm you, and that you are doing nothing to ask, what are your moral responsibilities? So I grant you, I'm not poo-pooing the facts. I'm just saying they're great, but what do they have to do with anything? What do they have to do with the core? What problem is that we are out of date, and we're going to get to that rabbi's letter. We are perfectly prepared as a Jewish community like a general who's ready to fight yesterday's war. We're not prepared to fight today's conversation. And we want to say, no, that's not the conversation, but you can't do that. Something has changed, Wes.
Daniel, I wanna thank you. I want to double click on Sheikh Jarrah. I'd like you to do two voices for us on Sheikh Jarrah.
Perfect.
Can you do I'm a card-carrying pro-Israel North American rabbi. What would my voice be? And I'm going to play by the template, the playbook. I'm going to give a good legalistic argument why we're right on Sheikh Jarrah, and I'm going to make that case and what that sounds like. And then could you give a different voice on Sheikh Jarrah?
Yes, I can. What you think is a profoundly ideological act of systemic oppression and racism is in fact a very minor issue of property rights being presented to the Israeli courts. Under Israeli law, when prior property rights are maintained, as long as nothing of judicial significance has happened to change those rights. Now, if, for example, you sell your deed, the ownership is passed. Under Israeli law, there's another way for ownership to be receded, and that is through a process of national annexation. Jordan never annexed the West Bank and Jerusalem to Jordan. And as a result, it never formally changed the legal status of Sheikh Jarrah.
That's our best shot on the party line.
I
just want to jump off a bridge. I have
three more. 1 second. It's getting better. There's a little better. The second one is that the people who are these are literally the best. I'm telling you, literally, this is straight from foreign ministry legal arguments. I'm telling you. Second, Jordan never formally registered the property claims of the people who had settled. And if they had a Jordanian property claim, the courts could assume that as well. But they have no deed of purchase. Even though Jordan sold it to them, they never registered it. And so in front of the courts, we have one group with a deed and one group with what's known in Hebrew as chazakah, with what's the term? With squatter rights. And even despite that, the court said, you could stay there as long as you pay a nominal rent to the Israeli prior owners. However, paying a nominal rent to the Israeli prior owners.
Okay, we got it. That's the party line.
That's it.
And we're not shocked that millennials don't love that.
They fell asleep. They left the room a long time ago.
Okay, what's the moral response?
The Jewish tradition recognizes that Jerusalem was destroyed because the Jewish people followed the law and did not understand that their responsibility is to go also beyond the requirement of the law. The most significant, the greatest violation of Jewish law is the desecration of God's name. And your behavior is designated as a desecration of God's name, not if you think you're right, and not if you think other people don't understand you and are taking you out of context. And it is not whether what you are doing is legally acceptable or not, but if a common person looks at you and says, shame on you, shame on you. When Israel says that our annexation of Palestinian lands in Israel has nullified Palestinian claims, and 2 million people cannot claim their properties which were taken from them. And these 8, 10, 50 people, these people, and it's not even the Yemenites themselves. The Yemenite property was owned by a trustees.
Right.
And that trustee was given over to the chief rabbinate of Jerusalem, which then sold it to a right-wing political group who are now claiming for themselves the claim, not that it was their parents' land. And I want to tell you, it is not passing the smell test. This is what your children are saying. And what they're saying is, it seems to me that Israel is functioning under a principle that might makes right. We have the power. We have the power to stop Hamas missiles. And we have the power to take away from whoever we want, regardless of what we want. And we could discriminate at will.
So
That's Sheikh Jarrah, my friend.
So Danielle, before we leave Sheikh Jarrah and go to the rabbinical student letter, I just want to talk about the elephant in the room when it comes to Sheikh Jarrah. I mean, what I hear you saying is that the party line that a good card-carrying pro-Israel rabbi or supporter would say is all this legalistic stuff about Jordan this, Jordan that deed. And that the kind of the moral response is, yeah, we should be ashamed. This is embarrassing. This is morally embarrassing. Okay, I get that. Here's my question for you. Isn't there a lot more Sheikh Jarrah where that came from? And isn't the real issue, I mean, when you walk in West Jerusalem, well, I've got a ton of family in West Jerusalem. I'm going to West Jerusalem on Sunday, right? My father lives in West Jerusalem. All those buildings are Arab buildings, Arab architecture. And isn't the elephant in the room that once you establish a principle that Arabs have a moral and legal right to reclaim their land that was lost in 48, then we're screwed. We don't have a state. It's not just Sheikh Jarrah, it's like West Jerusalem.
But I didn't claim that, Wes. I said if Israel wants to say 1948 created a do-over, as imperfect as it is, then that do-over has to apply to Jews and apply to Arabs. That means what Jews now, if in the midst of war, we relocated and reallocated, I'm not going to go back to 47. The problem is that you're willing to go back to 47 for Jews. You're not willing to go back to 47 for Palestinians. That's what you're not allowed to do. That's precisely it. You can't do it. I live in an Arab house. I'm not afraid that someone's going to come to me and say, excuse me, you owe me rent. I can't relitigate 47. I can't. I have a story, you have a story. But don't say you don't relitigate 47 and 48 for Jews. But you are willing to litigate it and kick the ass. That's what's horrific.
Right. Okay, so Danielle, here's where we are in the conversation just to frame up the rabbinical student letters. And there's so much to say here. What I hear you saying is that the problem with Israel over the last 10, 13 years is that it has managed the challenge of Palestinians just through power. We have the power, thank God we have the power, but I think you've said elsewhere that if you have a hammer, everything is a nail. And if you have power, that's how we solve a problem. And what gets elided from that conversation and that radar screen then is a moral conversation. What are moral obligations that we would have towards Palestinians? What's our plan for Gaza? What's our plan for the Palestinians in the West Bank as well? And that is a big problem, the lack of a moral conversation when our children are now living in a world in America where, as you put it elsewhere in this week, the energy is around uprooting evil from American society. The people who don't have rights should have rights. And now they look at Israel managing its problem just through power without a moral conversation. So that is where we're at now. And with that as the backdrop, can you talk to us about the rabbinical student letter, what you thought about it at the time, what you think about it now?
There is one possibility that, Wes, you and I will be given a pill. And we will be able to live another 100 years. Until which time, we can't produce a rabbinic leadership that we're ready to give the mantle over to. Or we can ask ourselves, if this is the rabbinic leadership and you and I don't have the pill, what do I have to do? We have learned a long time ago that we do not enrich our community through very, very clear boundaries, but that we listen to where somebody's coming from. Do you remember? I remember crying with you when you speak about an aunt, I forget which one, who marries a non-Jew, or who, you remember you telling me about that? I remember, I don't remember which member of your family, Aunt Bessie, and Aunt something.
Yes.
And your challenge was to a Jewish community who was saying, marrying a Jew, marrying a non-Jew, is the ultimate betrayal of Jewish history. And you said, where is your decency? You said, talk to these people, understand them. I know it's harder in this case, but I would argue that it's not much different. I would argue that the rabbis wrote this letter because you and I have failed. And I know that there's a lot of people listening to me today who are saying, what did I sign up for here? What, am I interested in bashing Israel here? Do you know what I'm doing, people? I'm trying, with Wes's help, to model a mainstreaming of a certain discourse that our children haven't heard from us. They haven't. Again, this is different. Do you know that the official Jewish community refuses to allow J Street into the Conference of Presidents? Like, what's the matter with you? And I'm not talking, I don't care about J Street. Our children have been growing up with a discourse about Israel that basically says, your troubles committed, your troubles are answered by the response, it's complicated. It's complicated. I know you're troubled, I'm troubled, it's complicated. And when we answer it's complicated, we use the story, some version of what Wes mentioned before, and all of the above. It's complicated. And as a result, don't be so troubled. Don't be troubled, it's complicated. And that is more or less the depth of what we have done. Now, what these rabbis are saying is, I was taught that it's complicated. And I want to tell you, if that's the best that Israel has, I can't be there anymore. Because this is not complicated. So do you know what I want to do with these rabbis? I want to start learning with them. I want to start talking to them. I never get angry at somebody because of something they said. I want to understand, how do I impact and influence? This is my future. What am I going to do? What, do you want to stay in your position, Wes, for another 100 years? What are we going to do? And I know it's tough. Now, I don't even know whether I could convince them. I don't know how to do this, but I know that the Jewish community, it's not like Beinhard said that there's no room for questions and debate. But there's plenty of room for questions and debate. That's not the issue. Nobody's voices are stifled. It's whether we, the ones who are carrying the pro-Israel community, it's not whether we allow our children to ask questions. It's whether we are asking the difficult questions that we need to have asked. And I believe that's the milieu within which this letter was written.
So Daniel, I just want to pause for a second and draw out a significant difference. I just want to clarify the conversation and bring something else to the table. This is a very, very, very different point and response and understanding of the letter than for example, Brad Artson, I love Brad, he's the best. He wrote a piece, Sharon Konanisfeld's fabulous. She shared a piece from our shul, in which, as I took both of them in their own way, Brad and Sharon said, hey, we applaud your empathy for the Palestinians who live in Gaza. That is a beautiful thing. We are super concerned about your lack of empathy for the Jews who are being bombed by 4,000 missiles. And where is your empathy just for other human beings who, by the way, happen to also be Jews? And by the way, you're going to be telling the Jewish story. And where's your empathy for that? And the response that I took from them, I don't know if they would agree with this rendering, but this is what I took away from them, was that what is missing, what's wrong with these rabbinical students? They don't have enough Israeli history. And what we need to do is come up with a curriculum that will supply more Israeli history to people who may not know about the litany from the 3 no's and 47 and the Gaza, blah, blah, blah. Okay. Israeli history is we need more Israeli history. And what I hear you saying is, no. Talk to me. You've got something to say. You actually love the Jewish people, the Jewish story, the Jewish state. And you've got a moral voice and a moral concern that I need to hear, and I want to engage with you. It's not about a new Israeli history curriculum. It's about a dialogue of moral voice. Am I hearing you right?
1,000,000%. And I want to, you think a history curriculum is going to change the current discourse? Not you. That's why we've been failing all along. That's why because we're not hearing the question. We're not hearing the cry. And we're choosing to answer our own questions. Now, both Sharon and Brad, and I don't blame them, as deans of rabbinic schools, have to write a letter. And that letter was not written to the students, it was written to their donors. One thing I can tell you, if you want to talk with these students, you don't write a letter. What do you think, you're writing a letter, telling them? You talk. You now sit down and say, okay, what am I doing? How do I use rabbinic? What am I doing in my, don't tell them. Change what you're doing in rabbinic schools and say, oops, if this letter just came up, maybe I'm doing something wrong. Maybe. And I want to tell you, it's not an additional curriculum on Israeli history.
So I want to see those rabbinical students, and I need to do a little bit of private therapy with you in the middle of this public conversation, because I think I really screwed this up, and I want to talk to you about that, and about the kind of emotional, what you do with emotion in an emotional time. By the way, before we get to that, did you feel this way in May when the bombs were falling and you read this? I mean, now it's several weeks later. Did you feel this way when the bombs were falling?
Not as sure. But I never allow myself to respond on the emotion of the minute.
Okay, we'll get to that in a minute.
We'll get that, but I wasn't as clear. I want you to know, I've been spending literally, I can't tell you, I'm trying to figure out what we're doing wrong. And so I think you're catching me at a time where I have the benefit, I don't necessarily have any wisdom, and I don't even know if I'm right, but I have the benefit of an articulate opinion. Under the old Daniel Hartman theory that I know what it is that I know, but I never claim what it is that I know is true. So, right. But now I've reached a point where I feel I understand something. But from the beginning, when I saw that letter, because this goes back, this is not the first letter, this is the worst letter, but there were other letters in the past. Right. And I remember colleagues of mine, they're always, the rabbinic letter, what did they say, blah, blah. How come you're condemning? I remember, how come you're condemning Israel? Why aren't you condemning Hamas? But it's like, we've been there.
Right.
We've been there before.
When
I heard this letter, it fit into, I knew that the responsibility, that it's just, that we have to deal with this differently. And that censorship is not going to work. Not censoring them out is not where we need to go.
Okay. So Daniel, I want to do a better job because I did a perfectly horrid job of seeing them. I do want to talk to you separately about the place of emotion and like, do you ever say, WTF, what the F? Do you ever say that? Do you ever feel that? And what do you do when something makes you say and feel what the F? What do you do with that? We'll come back to that because that's what happened to me. I just got triggered big time. But I want to do now what I did not do in May. I want to do a better job of seeing these rabbinical students because I wanted to blackball them. I mean, I literally walked into Michelle's office and said, if I die tomorrow, promise me on my deathbed now, you're never going to hire any of these people. Right? That's what I said. Promise me, this is my deathbed wish. I've worked with Michelle for 25 years. Promise me you will never hire these people. And I didn't use the word people. Okay. So I was just like in a very inflamed place. Now, so I want to do a better job of seeing these people, seeing these students. So can you talk about the kind of worldview that puts Palestine and Ferguson in the same sentence? Because I feel that Palestine and Ferguson are in the same sentence for a lot of the people who signed this letter. And to me, that's just appalling. That's anti-Semitism. That's a blood libel. That's anti-Semitism. That's a blood libel. Again, I have a WTF response. But if I'm going to see them, I have to move that WTF response to the side and try to see what's the worldview, which could see, to me, two things that do not belong in the same sentence at all, but they feel Ferguson and Palestine are in the same sentence. So could you comment on that?
I don't know if you're ever going to want to talk to me again. Because I think it's perfectly legitimate to put Ferguson and Palestine in the same sentence.
Say more.
It's perfectly legitimate for an American liberal Jew. I would never put them in the same sentence. I don't think they belong in the same sentence at all. How could you compare? It's ludicrous. But when people are putting them in the same sentence, they're not making a detailed historical analysis. Just like when people use the word apartheid on Israel, we are already, with our list of 17 distinctions between South Africa and the Israeli society. It's not apartheid. We don't have segregated bathrooms and we have rights. We're before you started, therefore when you use it, it's anti-Semitic. When they're saying those words, as in much public discourse, you're using analogies and family resemblances. You're not claiming complete factual and legal symmetry. And therefore, when you have to understand what somebody is saying. Now, when an American Jew, a liberal millennial, is engaged in freeing America from its moral corruption, which they felt was institutionally supported by the Trump administration. And whether that's factually correct or not, as if things didn't happen under Obama, we'll leave that aside. But I'm not talking about the factual, I'm just talking about the experience. That for 4 years, America lost its moral voice. And we are reclaiming, we are the ones who are making America great again. And the greatness of America is going to be dependent on its ability to uproot discrimination and injustice wherever we see it. That's the lenses that they're wearing. It's not right or wrong. That's just a fact. That's the lenses through which they're looking at the world. And it sometimes creates distortions, but that's what's there. And then as Jews, I'm talking it's precisely those who are pro-Israel. They have that lens and they look and they say, okay, I love America, I love Israel. What? That's my lens. You can't ask me to take off my lens, is to ask me not to be me. This is what is engulfing me now. This is the milieu of my thought process. Nothing is my gestalt, this is where I am. So don't tell me, excuse me, I'm sorry, close it down now and let me tell you all the difference. How could you associate innocent black victims with Hamas, who are all of the above, And again, remember, Israel tried to stop, and we have our whole litany. You're not, what happens is we're not hearing, we're entering into a legal debate with people who are having a public discourse. And when you try to catch them on those words, you're not understanding the language that they're using.
So, Danielle, how do we convert this negative energy deficit into positive energy? What if you had those rabbinical students there who wrote what they wrote, and particularly who, I mean, some of them apparently have said, teshuva, I wish I hadn't sent it, but especially those who said, I wrote it, I signed it, and I would write it and sign it again tomorrow. And they're at the Hartman Institute. Tell me what a successful conversation or a successful educational project would look like. And how can shuls in America do that?
Now, I don't know. Again, and here, see, you can change one of the most beautiful things about you is the way you combine your emotional and intellectual discourse within your soul. And if I were you, I wouldn't change anything about you, but you're not going to change it anyway. But how many people do you know? I don't know, who have both, who respond with such emotional integrity and are still willing to think about it. That move, that's the unique West move. Don't change it for anything in the world. I wish I could have more of that. And that's what makes you real and an effective religious leader, a leader of a community, of real people, because when you stand up, you're a real person. You're real. And then I'll follow someone who's real with their flaws and their moves. And you are constantly evaluating yourself. I'll follow you anywhere. So you don't change. But what I would say, if when I now, in my ability, after now I've thought about it, the first place that this conversation begins with is, I hear you. It's not that I want to hear more from you. I hear you. I hear what you're saying.
Mm.
And a big part of what you're saying, I have quieted for too long in my soul.
Mm.
I would start by validating. And what I'm trying to do, and this is what I'm suggesting, it's nothing that innovative, but I don't think we're doing it enough, is that when within the lovers and supporters of Israel, there is that, then they will never sign this letter. And they don't have to. They would write a different letter.
Mm.
This was a cry. This was a cry to say, my Israel, I've lost you.
Mm.
And I want to tell them, I hear you.
So Danielle, can I talk to you about a very practical thing? You know, so much of communication is not just the message, but it's the messenger. So you have unimpeachable street cred for any reasonable person about love of Israel. You live there, you run an institute there, you lost family members in the war there, you yourself were almost killed in a tank there, you fought the wars there, your kids have served there. You know, you've got all that. So no one can accuse you of being soft on Israel. You are Israel, okay? And therefore you can say this stuff because you are Israel, because you were in a tank, because you lost your family members. How do we move the North American community where rabbis don't have that street cred and where it's very much you're with us or against us kind of thing, and where kind of making the case on Sheikh Jarrah that you made would get you branded, as you're anti-Israel, you're not pro-Israel, et cetera, et cetera. So how do you think about the kind of moral conversation we've been talking about intersecting with the reality of turf in today's taught North American Jewish world?
I can speak from my perspective. You have as much creds as I do. Okay, so I thought, okay, you have within the confines of America spent your whole life as a lover of Israel. And anybody who will discount that, it's to them that I say, what did you call it? WTF? You, but someone's going to discredit you. Like, how much more do you have to do? You don't love Israel and you are not committed to Israel in an iota less than me. We have different histories. We lived in different places. The credibility of your Zionist conversation is the same as mine. Now, the fact is, some people won't accept that. But you want to know something? The ones who are most upset about what I'm saying have discounted my credibility already. Because what they do, part of the discourse in America today is it's all ad hominem. We don't have to deal with what a person says. We just have to delegitimize the person who says it. So when mainstream established rabbis like you, who are the best friends that Israel has in the universe, you have all the credibility for the nuance. And anybody who says otherwise, the flaw, it's WTF, you are the problem, not West Clark. And the problem is, Wes, that you don't realize how much credibility you have.
Well, thank you,
And
Daniel.
you know where it comes from? Should I tell you where it comes from? It comes from your love of Israel. You are such a lover of Israel that you are putting yourself in a position of inferiority in that relationship as an expression of what Israelis have gone through. And I'm going to tell you, you don't have to, Wes. You've earned it.
Thank you, Daniel. So I want to ask one last question, and then we'll whatever time we have left, we'll take a few questions from the chat. Our kids are finding, and you know this, you've talked about it in another program this week, that when they go to college, they can't be LGBTQ plus a Zionist. They can't be global warming plus a Zionist. How do we talk to our kids about the world they're going to inherit in college, and how can we bring this awareness of the need for moral dialogue, moral conversation into the rough and tumble of the world they're about to inherit?
Okay, here I have the benefit of hearing from Brian's critique of something that I said. And I want to give voice to what he said because I think his answer was better than the answer that I gave. I think what we have to tell our kids is that the first thing you need to do is to express moral indignation against those expressions. Now, that's the first thing, is to recognize the injustice of what's happening. That in the name, that in institutions, I'm going to university to be a part of an open marketplace of ideas where I leave all my preconceived notions, and I'm supposed to come into a place where ideas matter, facts matter, embracing of hearing different voices matter. And that is my college experience. I want to know why these people are robbing me of my college. This is not what liberal education means. And so part of what we need to do is to fight, and I want to tell you, not when it comes from, conservatives can get together and they talk together about the woke culture and blah, blah, blah. And they go on and on and on. And it's just forget it. It's your kids who are woke. Say, is this what, let's talk about what does an open marketplace of ideas really mean? And is this appropriate? And
so Daniel, let me ask you, is that I would say the overarching concern of the North American Jewish community, as I sense it, if I could put it in a single sentence, is that all the anti-Israel animus is just underlined by anti-Semitism. and it's a convenient pretext for old-fashioned Jew hatred. How do you think about anti-Semitism in the context of what we've been talking about as a legitimate moral critique of Israel, but is often, in fact, anti-Semitism as well?
Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to take a break for 1 minute because I have a flu and I've been drinking 50 liters of water today, and I'm going to take a bathroom break, and then I'm going to, Wes, could you sing something? I'll be back in 1 minute.
They don't want me to sing things, but I would actually, if anyone wants to share a reaction to the conversation to date for 1 minute, I would be happy to hear your thoughts. I will just say, I have found the whole week, but particularly Daniel's Torah here and other speeches that he's been given or teachings he's been doing, really paradigm changing for me, because he's made me think that I need to refresh some of my thinking, and that I need to do a better job of hearing people who want to hear a moral conversation that is not happening. And I think those are all really fair points. All I can tell you is when you judge by the evidence of, Shira and I spent a lot of money on a lot of tuition that was supposed to promote a love of Israel. And our friends from our Schechter and Gann years spent a lot of money on a lot of tuition for a love of Israel. And that doesn't do it. There's something missing. There's something missing. And I think Danielle, and I was like angry at these kids and rejecting these kids, etc. And Danielle has given me a whole new paradigm. So Danielle, last question, I think, and then it's about 10 o'clock.
On anti-Semitism, could I respond to that?
Please.
And here I want to really aggravate everyone. What happens when some of the conversation is anti-Semitic, but by calling it is self-destructive? What happens when people believe that we are overusing the anti-Semitic claim, which we are, by the way? Because while some anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism, it doesn't mean that all anti-Zionism is. And we are overusing anti-Semitism to an extent that we are exposed to the perception that we are using anti-Semitism in order to censor and quiet voices that we don't want to hear. When the essential criticism of Israel right now is about white power, Israeli power, Jewish power, the perception is that in our discourse on anti-Semitism, we are using our power to try to dictate the conversation instead of responding to the arguments themselves. To the anti-Semites, I don't debate anti-Semites. I don't talk to them. I protect myself from them. But the content of what anti-Semites are saying today is being mirrored in the same conversations of non-anti-Semites. And if you actually want to, and I'll just give you a small twist, if we actually want to reach liberal Americans and liberal Jews, it probably is not the most effective thing to do to label them as anti-Semites.
Danielle, I think we need to end here. I just want to end with a profound thank you. And I just want to articulate real quick as we end and close some really huge takeaways that I got from this. It was, your whole Torah this week has changed the following lens. It used to be that when I would see a millennial, I thought they had a skin disease. And I thought the problem was on them. And that includes my own kids who are millennials. And now I realize that a much better and wiser response is I hear you, and I need to work on doing that work. I need to hear you. And that's not just about them and me and parent-child and parents and children. Because actually, if you're driven by a love of Israel, it's very practical, self-interested. If what you care about is Zion, then you need to do a better job. I need to do a better job. We need to do a better job of hearing people who have questions about Zion and hearing their questions and engaging them thoughtfully. Danielle, that's paradigm shifting for me, and I'm deeply grateful to you. Thank you, guys. Thank you. Lots of love.